Afternoon at a high-end office tower in Boston. A primary elevator is jammed, stuck between floors, with several high-profile guests trapped inside. The building management stands in the lobby, sweating under the pressure of angry tenants. Noah Bennett, a 41-year-old contract technician, walks in wearing a worn work jacket and carrying a simple toolkit. A manager whispers, "I hope he knows what he's doing." Noah ignores the doubt. He checks the control panel. Suddenly, here through the intercom, a group inside begins shouting in frantic, rapid-fire Italian. Noah looks up. He presses the button and speaks. "Calma, sto lavorando." The room freezes. Stand by. Now. Listen. Watch. Noah Bennett was a man of steel, silence, and absolute rhythmic routine. At 41, his face was a map of quiet focus and the deep, enduring weariness of a man who worked two lives, one to keep the city's vertical transport running and one to keep a small home safe. He was a freelance elevator technician, a ghost engineer who moved through the back corridors of Boston's skyscrapers, fixing the complex pulleys and logic gates that others found too temperamental to handle. He didn't have a permanent office with a view of the harbor. He didn't have a corporate ID that granted him access to the executive cafeteria or the top-floor gym. He was the man in the navy blue jumpsuit who sat on a folding stool in the dark, humid motor room, surrounded by grease and the heavy, metallic scent of industrial oil. Noah chose this life by design, a deliberate retreat from the noise. He was a single father to 10-year-old Luca. 5 years ago, his world had been surgically hollowed out when his wife, Sarah, passed away. Since that day, Noah had systematically dismantled his old high-pressure career at an international engineering firm. He didn't want the 70-hour work weeks, the red-eye flights, or the constant travel across Europe and Asia anymore. He needed a life with a hard stop, a life that allowed him to be at the school gate at 3:15 p.m. and at the kitchen table for geometry homework and dinner at 7 p.m. He traded the prestige of a senior consultant title for the flexibility of a contractor, because his son's laughter was the only currency he cared about now. In the eyes of the building managers in the suits who hurried past him, Noah was essentially invisible. He was a utility, not a person. They saw the scuffed boots in the toolbox that had seen better decades, and they assumed he lacked the hustle required for the modern world. In their world, if you weren't climbing the ladder, you were standing still. They didn't see the man who spent his Sundays teaching his son how to restore old bicycles or planting a garden in their small yard. They didn't see the man who had learned the value of a quiet life after seeing how loud and fragile the world could be when everything breaks. Noah's resume, if anyone had bothered to read it, was a masterpiece of global experience. He had spent years in Milan and Turin, working on the vertical infrastructure of some of Europe's most iconic landmarks. He understood the logic of flow, the way a building breathes through its elevators, and how the vibration of a cable can signal a failure before the computer even detects it. But in Boston, he was just the guy who fixes the lift. He never corrected them. He never boasted about the 3 languages he spoke or the complex architectural systems he had designed. He was content with his camouflage. He liked the honesty of the metal. Unlike people, the elevators didn't lie to him. If they were failing, they told him exactly where the friction was. On this particular afternoon, the Centennial Tower, a glass and steel monument to corporate power, was in a state of terminal panic. The main express elevator, a high-tech marvel that serviced the executive floors, had seized up between the 22nd and 23rd levels. Inside was a group of international investors who were supposed to sign a historic $3 billion merger by 5 p.m. The primary maintenance team had already spent an hour failing to bypass the safety interlock, their faces pale with fear. Noah had been called in as a last-ditch effort, a name on a list of emergency contractors that the building manager had barely glanced at. As he walked through the marble lobby, his presence was a sharp, grounding contrast to the polished surroundings. The general manager, a man who checked his phone every 30 seconds, looked at Noah's faded jacket and let out a long, frustrated sigh that carried the weight of 1,000 missed deadlines. "We're on a timer here, Bennett," the manager snapped, tapping his gold watch with a nervous finger. "My team says the logic board is fried. If you can't get those doors open in 20 minutes, I'm calling the fire department for a forced extraction. That's a $1 million lawsuit waiting to happen. Do you even have the right sensors for this specialized model? Noah didn't respond to the pressure. He had been in high-voltage substations where one wrong move meant total darkness. A manager's anxiety was just background noise. He simply opened his toolkit, pulled out a ruggedized tablet, and began to listen. He wasn't just checking the digital logs. He was feeling the vibration of the building. He saw the doubt in their eyes and he smiled inwardly. He was used to being the underdog. He knew that the most important parts of a system are the ones that never make a sound until they are truly broken. In a real-world environment, position rarely reflects actual capacity. Many people carry skills that the world never sees, not because they are hiding them, but because no one ever bothers to look past the uniform. The most valuable person in the room is often the one we choose to ignore until the lights go out. The lobby of the Centennial Tower was a theater of human frustration. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee, recycled oxygen, and mounting desperation. The building's lead engineer, a man named Henderson, who prided himself on his digital-first approach and his Ivy League credentials, was frantically refreshing his tablet, his brow beaded with sweat. "The safety buffer is locked," Henderson shouted, his voice echoing off the high-gloss walls. "I've tried 3 different bypass codes. The system is rejecting the handshake. It thinks the cable tension is imbalanced, even though the weight sensors are clear. It's a ghost in the code, I'm telling you. We need to reboot the entire tower." Through the intercom system, the sounds from inside the elevator were becoming increasingly chaotic. There were 6 people trapped in a 4-by-4-foot box of steel and mirrored glass. They had been in there for 70 minutes. The air conditioning had automatically cut to 50% to preserve the emergency battery, and the heat was starting to climb. The silence of the shaft amplified their fear. A group of 4 men and 2 women were shouting at each other. They weren't speaking English. They were speaking Italian, rapid, melodic, but currently jagged with the sharp edges of primal panic. Their voices were high-pitched, overlapping in a chaotic wave of perche and aiuto. They were discussing the air quality, the possibility of the cables snapping, and the catastrophic loss of the deal if they didn't make the meeting. They were certain they were trapped in a falling casket. To the building staff outside, it just sounded like angry noise. "They don't sound calm," one of the receptionists whispered, clutching her hands to her chest. "The manager says they're some of the biggest developers in Europe. If they have a panic attack or a medical event in there, our insurance will never recover. We're looking at a total PR nightmare." The manager turned to Noah, who was currently kneeling by the floor-level access port, tracing a fiber optic line with a small, steady flashlight. "Bennett, did you hear that? They're losing it. Tell them something. Reassure them that we're working on it. Use the intercom." Noah paused, his ear pressed against the cold metal wall. He could hear the specific cadence of their fear. He recognized the dialect. It was Northern Italian, the kind he used to hear every morning in the cafes of Milan when he was working on the city's ancient shafts. He heard one man saying that he felt his heart racing and that the elevator was surely going to drop. He heard a woman pleading with the others to stop shouting because she couldn't breathe. He realized they were entering a state of collective hysteria. Noah realized that the technical problem was only half the battle. If the passengers began to physically fight the doors or jump around in panic, they would trigger the secondary mechanical brakes, which would lock the elevator so tightly that no code in the world could release it without a blowtorch and 10 hours of labor. The system was reacting to their fear, not just a glitch. He looked at the manager, then at the lead engineer, who was still swearing at his computer. "You're trying to force the system to say yes before you've told it why," Noah said quietly. "You need to reset the secondary interlock, not the main board. But first, you need to stop the vibration inside the car. You need to ground them." Noah reached for the communication handset on the wall. He didn't look for a script. He didn't ask for permission. He pressed the button and spoke into the silence of the lobby. But the words that came out weren't for the people standing around him. "Calma. Per favore, calma," Noah said. His voice was no longer the flat, technical voice of a Boston contractor. It was a rich, steady baritone, flowing with the natural, rhythmic assurance of a native speaker. Mi chiamo Noah. Sto lavorando sul sistema proprio ora. Non c'è pericolo. I cavi sono sicuri al 100%. Sarete fuori tra pochi minuti. Respirate profondamente. Datemi solo un po' di tempo. Fidatevi di me. Calm. Please. Calm. My name is Noah. I am working on the system right now. There is no danger. The cables are 100% secure. You will be out in a few minutes. Breathe deeply. Just give me a little time. Trust me. The effect was instantaneous. The shouting inside the elevator stopped. The chaotic vibration of the car, caused by the passengers pacing and hitting the walls, subsided. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence of cooperation. In the lobby, the shock was even more profound. The general manager's jaw actually dropped. The lead engineer froze with his finger mid-air over his keyboard. The receptionist stared at Noah as if he had just spontaneously combusted and turned into a different human being. He was no longer the guy in the jumpsuit. He was the person holding the entire building's reputation in his hands. The ordinary dad, the guy they thought was just a backup, had just diagnosed the entire human situation in a language none of them knew he spoke. He had bypassed the ego layer of the building and reached directly into the hearts of the people who mattered. He was the architect of the moment. In any crisis, the technical solution is rarely enough. Success requires the ability to translate fear into cooperation. We often spend all our energy fixing the machine and forget that the machine is only as stable as the people using it. Real expertise is knowing when to stop being a technician and start being a human bridge. The silence in the Centennial Tower lobby was heavy, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic ticking of a decorative clock. The suits were no longer whispering. They were staring at Noah Bennett with a new, uncomfortable kind of curiosity. They had spent 2 years looking at him and seen a shadow. Now they were realizing they were looking at a giant who had been hiding in plain sight. You speak Italian? The manager stammered, his voice sounding thin and small. Noah didn't look up from his tablet. He was already deep in the subroutines of the elevator's safety logic, his mind moving faster than their hardware. I spent 6 years in Milan, he replied, his voice returning to its calm, technical neutrality. I helped design the interlock system for the Torre of Alaska project. This model is a variation of that logic. It's not a code ghost, Henderson. It's a physical synchronization lag. Noah pointed to a flickering line of hex code on his screen. The elevator thinks the weight is shifting because the passengers were jumping. The digital sensor is fighting the physical brake. If you keep trying to force a bypass, you're just going to trip the emergency catch and lock them in for 12 hours. You have to tell the system that the shift was an expected variable, so it clears the internal audit and resets the brake pressure. Henderson, the lead engineer, looked at the screen, then at Noah. He felt a burning, genuine shame crawl up his neck. He had mocked Noah for having a simple toolkit, yet Noah was now explaining a level of systems architecture that Henderson hadn't even covered in his graduate courses. He realized his expertise was just theory, while Noah's was built on the bone-deep reality of the metal. How did you... the manual says to never adjust the audit logs manually? Henderson muttered, his arrogance completely deflated. The manual assumes the building is empty, Noah countered. In the real world, you have to account for human physics and the weight of their fear. Now stand back. Noah's fingers moved across the ruggedized tablet with a speed and precision that left the room breathless. He wasn't just typing. He was performing a surgical bypass of a multi-million-dollar security grid. He bypassed the main server and went straight to the motor room relay. He was speaking the language of the machine now, a digital dialect that was just as fluent as his Italian. He was recalibrating the world one line of code at a time. Through the intercom, a voice responded from inside the car. Grazie, Noah. Abbiamo capito. Stiamo aspettando. Thank you, Noah. We understand. We are waiting. Noah nodded to himself, his hazel eyes focused and clear. He noticed a 0.04 millisecond lag in the secondary elevator loop, a tiny microscopic stutter that the building's sensors had been ignoring for months. That stutter was the reason for the jam. It was a rounding error in the vertical alignment that had finally accumulated enough friction to trip the safety. He corrected it with 2 keystrokes. For 10 minutes, the lobby was a vacuum of sound. No one talked about the stock market. No one checked their watches. They all watched the man in the faded jacket. They watched the grease on his knuckles and the calm, unburdened look on his face. They realized then that Noah Bennett wasn't unambitious. He was simply finished with the game. He didn't need their approval because he already owned his own reality. He was a father who had walked away from the sky to be on the ground for his son. And in that moment, he was the only person in the building who was truly free. Suddenly, a heavy mechanical clunk echoed from deep within the elevator shaft. It was the sound of the secondary interlock releasing. The digital display on the lobby wall, which had been frozen at 22, flickered and changed to 21, then 20. The car was moving. The lights in the lobby seemed to brighten as the power surged back into the primary lift. The elevator glided down to the lobby level with a smooth, professional hiss. The wolf pack of managers and engineers crowded around the doors, their designer shoes clicking on the floor. Noah stepped back, folding his tablet and sliding it into his bag. He moved into the shadows of a large decorative pillar, returning to his role as the invisible help. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to finish his shift. The doors slid open. The 6 international investors stepped out. They were flushed, their expensive suits a bit rumpled, but they were remarkably calm. The lead investor, a man in his 60s with a sharp, silver-maned look, scanned the lobby. He didn't look at the manager who was rushing forward with a groveling apology and a promise of a free steak dinner. He didn't look at the lead engineer. He looked for the man with the voice. "Dove Noah?" "Shrey?" the man asked, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the manager's greeting. "Where is Noah?" The manager pointed vaguely toward the pillar. Noah stepped out, offering a polite, neutral nod. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had done his job. The investor walked straight up to him, ignoring the security guards and the VPs. He reached out and gripped Noah's hand with both of his. "You saved more than our evening, Noah. You saved a partnership that has been 3 years in the making. And you did it with a respect for our language and our fear that I have not found in this entire city. Thank you." Noah gave a small, humble shrug. "The metal is the same in every language, sir. It just needs to be listened to. I'm glad you're safe." The investor pulled a card from his pocket, a thick, embossed piece of stationery, and handed it to Noah. "If you ever find yourself in Milan again, or if you ever decide you want to work on a system that actually values your mind, call me. I have 3 projects that are currently screaming for a listener like you. We need an architect who isn't afraid of the ground." Noah took the card but didn't look at it. He tucked it into his pocket. "I'll keep it in mind, sir. But right now, I have a geometry project in a small apartment that's currently reaching its deadline. If there's nothing else, I have to go." Real competence doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a title to be felt. When the truth is undeniable, there is no need for a speech. The most impactful people in our lives are often the ones who are perfectly content to let their actions speak for them. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something that settles on you when you're the only one who knows the way home. The lobby began to return to its usual high-frequency hum. The investors were escorted to the executive lounge for their meeting, their voices now calm and focused. The general manager was barking orders to the cleaning crew to reset the aesthetic of the floor. But the atmosphere near the technical port remained heavy. Henderson, the lead engineer, stood by the access panel, staring at the lines of code Noah had left on the display. He was a man who had spent his life chasing the next certification, the next accolade, the next win. But looking at Noah's symphony of logic, he realized he had been looking at the world through the wrong end of a telescope. He saw the Velasca logic and realized how far ahead Noah was. "Noah!" Henderson called out as Daniel was heading for the revolving doors. Noah stopped, his toolkit hanging heavy from his shoulder. He turned around, his expression as steady as a horizon line. "Yes, Henderson? The System B feedback loop should be audited by Friday. I left the notes in the shadow log. Don't forget to check the grounding wire. Henderson walked over, his posture no longer rigid or arrogant. He looked at Noah's scuffed boots and then at his own polished loafers. I wanted to say sorry for the backup comment and for thinking you were just a line tech. I've been looking at your uniform for 2 years and I never once looked at your eyes. You're the best engineer in this building, aren't you? Noah gave a small, weary smile. I'm a dad, Henderson. That's the only title I'm currently trying to keep. Engineering is just a tool I use to pay for the soccer cleats and the science kits. Don't overthink it. Titles are just labels we put on the box. How can you be so calm about it? Henderson asked, a genuine pain confusion in his voice. You just saved a $3 billion deal. You could be running this whole department by tomorrow morning. You could have a corner office and a 6-figure bonus. Why do you choose the back alleys and the grease? Because the back alleys don't have politics, Noah replied softly, and grease washes off. But missing my son's bedtime? That's a system failure I can't reboot. I already won the race, Henderson. I just decided to stop at a different finish line. The view from the ground is much clearer when you're not trying to climb over everyone. The manager walked over looking sheepish. Bennett, the board is asking for the final integrity report. They want you to come to the executive floor for a briefing. They want to discuss a permanent contract, salary at the director level, full benefits, no more hourly rates. Noah checked his watch. 3:05 p.m. The school bus would be reaching the corner in 10 minutes. I appreciate the offer, Noah said, stepping into the revolving door. But I've already got a commitment at 3:15. Tell the board the report is on the server. And tell them the elevators will stay running as long as they remember to listen to the vibration once in a while. I'm taking the rest of the day off. As Noah stepped out into the crisp Boston air, he felt a profound sense of peace. He hadn't changed the world. He hadn't solved the crisis of urban infrastructure. But he had stayed true to the man Sarah had loved. He had provided a safe passage for people in the dark, and he had done it without losing himself. He climbed into his 10-year-old truck. The engine roared to life, a healthy, rhythmic sound that Noah had tuned himself. He drove away from the glass tower, leaving the important people to their important meetings. He didn't need their penthouse view. He had his own view from the ground, and it was absolutely perfect. He was exactly where he belonged. When a problem is resolved well, the most important thing isn't the recognition. It's the knowledge that you were capable when it mattered. Many people spend their lives building monuments to themselves, while the real builders are busy ensuring that the foundations stay solid for everyone else. True success is knowing when you have enough. Noah reached the school gate at exactly 3:14 p.m. A minute later, the door swung open and a sea of children flooded onto the sidewalk. Luca came running out, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, a wide, gap-toothed grin on his face. Dad, you're here. You're not late. I thought the big building would keep you, Luca cried, jumping into Noah's arms. Noah swung him around, the smell of graphite and playground air grounding him more than any Italian dialect ever could. I told you I'd be here, pal. The elevator dragon tried to slow me down, but we made a deal. I'm faster than the dragon. Did you fix it, Dad? Did the big building stop crying? I saw the ambulance on the news. Noah laughed, setting him down and taking his hand. Yeah, Luca, it's all quiet now. Everyone is happy and safe. We're all heading home. They walked toward the truck, talking about the geometry project and the upcoming weekend camping trip. To anyone walking by, they were just another father and son in a sea of families. No one looked at Noah and saw an international consultant or a master engineer. They didn't see the man who saved $1 billion deal. They just saw a dad in a faded jacket. That night, as Noah tucked Luca into bed, he looked at the business card from the Italian investor sitting on the nightstand. He thought about Milan. He thought about the high-rises and the prestige. Then he looked at the drawing Luca had pinned to the wall, a picture of a tall building with a tiny, smiling dad at the top, holding a giant wrench. Underneath the drawing, Luca had written, "My dad keeps the world moving. He knows all the secrets of the sky." Noah smiled, a thick lump forming in his throat. He reached out and turned off the light. He didn't need the director title. He didn't need the $3 billion deal. He had the only audit report that mattered. The story of the single dad and the elevator didn't end with a headline or a promotion. It ended with a simple Friday night. But in that glass tower in Boston, the frequency had changed. The managers started looking at the staff with a bit more respect. The engineers started listening to the vibration instead of just the code. And a few more people started leaving the office before the sun went down. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for the world isn't to build a taller tower. It's to be the person who reminds everyone that the floor is solid. Noah Bennett was home, and for the first time in 5 years, the foundation was absolutely unbreakable. The view from the ground was enough. True value is not defined by the position you hold, but by the integrity you carry within it. A person's worth is found in their character and the depth of their commitment to those they love, not in the titles they demand or the languages they boast. Never judge a person by the surface, for the quietest hands often hold the greatest secrets of strength. If you believe that real expertise doesn't need a fancy title to be heard, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been overlooked because you didn't have the right title? How did you prove them wrong?